Have you ever noticed how, before you even speak, the world has already decided how much you are worth? And how strangely that judgment often mixes admiration, fear, desire, and dismissal all at once. Meet the Black woman who redefined wealth in America, not by money first, but by understanding this psychology early, that society watches her closely, measures her body, her confidence, her silence, and even her ambition, long before it ever listens to her mind. She learned that racism does not always shout. Sometimes it whispers through lowered expectations and obsessive attention. Men watched her intensely, not always because they wanted to support her, but because powerful women make insecure systems uncomfortable. Some men admired her strength, some felt threatened by it, and some tried to possess it mentally before she could even own it herself. She realized that obsession is not the same as respect, and attention is not the same as value. As a therapist, would tell you this is where many women get trapped, mistaking being watched for being chosen, mistaking validation for safety. She saw how men obsessed over her presence, her resilience, her beauty, yet still doubted her competence, and she understood that this contradiction was not her failure. It was the system's confusion. Wealth, for her, began the moment she stopped internalizing those mixed signals. She stopped shrinking to appear non-threatening and stopped performing to be liked. Instead, she anchored herself in self-trust, knowing that when men obsess, it often reflects their unmet needs, not your responsibility. She taught herself and other women this lesson. Do not build your self-worth on how intensely someone looks at you, but on how consistently you honor yourself. Racism tried to define her worth through limitation, and patriarchy tried to define it through desire. But she refused both cages. She invested in her mind, her skills, and her boundaries, because real wealth is being unbuyable by approval. Every woman listening, the therapy truth is this. When you feel watched, judged, or obsessed over, pause and ask, is this empowering me or extracting from me? The Black woman who redefined wealth in America didn't wait for permission to be valued. She decided her value first and let the world adjust. And that is the most powerful form of wealth you can ever build, one that no system, no prejudice, and no obsession can take away. Why do some women learn the true meaning of wealth only after they have been forced to survive, while others are taught it as comfort from the beginning? And what does that say about the world we live in? Meet the Black woman who redefined wealth in America by discovering that when the system does not protect you, survival itself becomes your first and most important investment. She learned early that money was not the starting point. Safety was. Stability was. The ability to rest without fear was. Racism taught her that nothing would be handed over gently. And psychology taught her that when resources are scarce, people start watching you differently. Men watched her closely, sometimes with fascination, sometimes with obsession. Because a woman who survives pressure carries a quiet power. Some men were drawn to her resilience. Others tried to control it. And some attempted to benefit from her emotional labor without offering security in return. As a therapist would explain, this is where many women confuse attention with support. She understood that obsession often appears when a woman has strength that others want access to, but not responsibility for. So she made a radical decision. She stopped investing her energy in being understood and started investing it in being secure. She put her time into education, into skills that could not be taken, into communities that saw her as human, not just impressive. She knew that survival mode can harden the heart if you let it, so she chose to let it sharpen her boundaries instead. The lesson she lived is one every woman needs to hear. When men obsess over your strength, your struggle, or your globe, ask yourself whether they are adding to your safety or feeding on your endurance. She redefined wealth by refusing to romanticize struggle and by refusing relationships, workplaces, or spaces that drained her under the promise of future reward. Her wealth became the ability to choose peace over chaos, clarity over confusion, and self-respect over approval. To you listening now, here is the therapeutic truth she embodied. Survival is not your final destination, it is your foundation. Build on it intentionally. Protect your energy like capital. And remember, the Black woman who redefined wealth in America did not survive so others could admire her pain. She survived so she could live freely, securely, and on her own terms. What happens inside a woman's mind when she is rejected again and again, yet still feels eyes on her, watching her, measuring her, and quietly wondering how she keeps standing? Meet the Black woman who redefined wealth in America by understanding something deeply psychological. Rejection is not the absence of value, it is often proof of it. She noticed that while opportunities were denied, attention never disappeared. Men observed her growth with fascination, sometimes obsession, because her refusal to break challenged what they believed power looked like. Some wanted to mentor her only to feel important. Some wanted to attach themselves to her momentum, and others dismissed her publicly while tracking her privately. As a therapist would say, this is the moment where self-worth either fractures or solidifies. She chose to turn rejection into a private currency, something she could spend on courage instead of shame. Every closed door taught her discernment. Every dismissal trained her intuition. She stopped explaining herself to people who benefited from misunderstanding her. She realized that when men obsess over a woman's resilience, it can be a subtle attempt to access her energy without earning her trust. So she became selective, emotionally and professionally. She learned to ask, "Are you curious about me, or are you threatened by what I represent?" Wealth, in her definition, became the freedom to choose who gets access to her time, her body, her ideas, and her emotions. Racism tried to make her invisible, yet obsession tried to make her available, and she rejected both roles. She built value outside validation, creating work, networks, and influence that did not depend on approval. For every woman listening, the therapeutic lesson is clear. Rejection does not diminish you, but chasing acceptance can. When someone watches you closely yet refuses to support you openly, trust the behavior, not the words. The Black woman who redefined wealth in America didn't beg to be recognized, became undeniable by honoring her boundaries and believing that her worth was never up for debate. Have you ever asked yourself why true freedom feels threatening to others the moment a woman stops asking for permission and starts choosing herself? Meet the Black woman who redefined wealth in America by realizing that ownership is not just legal, it is psychological. She saw how men reacted differently when she stopped seeking approval and began owning her ideas, her work, and her future. Some admired her confidence. Others obsessed over her independence, because ownership removes leverage. When a woman owns her direction, she cannot be easily controlled by praise, fear, or scarcity. As a therapist would explain, obsession often appears when someone senses they are losing influence. She noticed that when she spoke less and acted more, attention intensified. Men watched her decisions, questioned her choices, and sometimes tried to position themselves as gatekeepers, not to help her, but to stay relevant in her story. She learned the difference between partnership and interference. Wealth, for her, became the ability to move without asking, to create without explaining, and to protect what she built without guilt. She understood that racism and patriarchy both prefer women dependent, because dependence keeps systems stable. By choosing ownership, she disrupted comfort zones. She invested in assets, in intellectual property, in spaces where her voice had authority, and she stopped apologizing for wanting more. To women listening, here's the therapeutic guidance she lived by.
Ask.
When someone obsesses over your choices, check whether they are invested in your growth or attached to your control. Obsession without support is not love, it is anxiety. She taught herself to listen to patterns, not promises. The men who respected her ownership showed consistency, not curiosity. The ones who resisted it demanded access without accountability. Redefining wealth meant understanding that freedom is expensive, but dependence costs more. She claimed the right to say no, to walk away, and to build quietly. And this is the powerful truth she leaves you with. The Black woman who redefined wealth in America did not become wealthy to be admired. She became wealthy to be free, and freedom, once claimed, changes everything. What does it really mean to leave something behind that outlives you? Especially when the world has spent so much time trying to tell you who you are allowed to be. Meet the Black woman who redefined wealth in America by understanding that legacy is not built on applause, but on intention. She saw how success changed the way people looked at her, how men watched her with deeper intensity once her influence grew. Some admired her vision, some obsessed over her position. Some tried to attach themselves to her name because legacy attracts those who want proximity to power. As a therapist would gently remind you, obsession often reveals insecurity, not devotion. She learned that legacy requires discernment because not everyone who praises you wants you to rise higher. She began to think beyond herself, beyond momentary recognition, and asked a harder question: who becomes safer, freer, and stronger because I existed? Wealth, in her definition, became the ability to create paths where none existed before, especially for women who looked like her. She invested in mentorship, in community, and in narratives that honored dignity rather than struggle alone. She understood that when men obsess over a woman's legacy, it can be an attempt to claim authorship over her success, so she protected her story fiercely. She taught other women that you do not owe access to those who did not share the weight of your journey. The therapeutic lesson she embodied is profound. Legacy grows when you stop performing for approval and start acting from alignment. She refused to dilute her values to stay palatable, and she refused to shrink her impact to ease discomfort. To every woman listening, hear this clearly. Your worth is not measured by how many people watch you, desire you, or speak your name, but by how deeply you live in truth. The Black woman who redefined wealth in America did not chase immortality through fame. She built it through integrity, courage, and care. And that is the kind of wealth that continues to grow long after the noise fades.